February 2025. A month of fire and ice. While blizzards swallowed towns whole, wildfires turned cities to ash. Tornadoes ripped through neighborhoods, leaving nothing but silence. Floodwaters rose, swallowing streets, homes, and the people inside. Them thought the world wasn't just suffering. It was screaming, but the real terror. It wasn't the storms. It wasn't the flames. It was what lurked in the shadows of the chaos. People vanished, without a trace. Phones rang from numbers that don't exist, and love turned deadly. These are 3 real stories from the darkest February in recent history. Some will call it bad luck, others will see the pattern. But after hearing these stories, you'll know the truth. Something is watching, and this February, it came closer than ever.
The Vanishing Hiker. It started as a simple solo hiking trip. A young man eager for adventure set out into the wilderness with nothing but his backpack, his phone, and a thirst for solitude. He wanted to document everything, every step, every sight, every breath of fresh mountain air. He posted updates online, sharing pictures of towering pines stretching toward an empty sky, a river so clear you could see the stones at the bottom, the soft glow of the sun as it melted behind the horizon. For the first few hours, his posts were full of excitement. No people, just peace. That peace did not last. Something changed. His posts became different, shorter, uneasy. His last text was one sentence. I keep hearing something. Then the video. The last thing anyone ever saw of him. The footage was shaky. Darkness swallowed the trees around him, his headlamp casting weak beams of light between the branches. The glow barely touched the blackness between them, like the woods were swallowing the light whole. His breathing was ragged, panicked, then a whisper, his voice barely audible, thick with fear. I think someone is following me. He spun the camera around. The trees stretched endlessly, unmoving. Nothing was there, but the way he spoke, the way his voice shook. He was not just scared, he was terrified. A twig snapped, his breath hitched. The camera jolted violently as he turned. The screen blurred, then focused. Nothing. He swallowed hard, his breathing sharp, uneven. If this is some kind of sick joke, stop. Silence. Then came the sound of leaves shifting, slow, deliberate, not wind, not an animal. Footsteps. The camera flickered, static crawling over the screen for just a second. His eyes darted from tree to tree. The darkness between them stretched wide, yawning, as if something was hiding just beyond the light. Then the camera cut out. That was the last time anyone saw him. The search begins. The next morning, when he failed to check in, his family panicked. Calls went straight to voicemail. No messages, no activity. By nightfall, search teams were sent out. They followed his last known GPS coordinates deep into the woods, miles away from any town, any road, any help. They found his campsite. His tent was still zipped shut, his sleeping bag untouched, his supplies perfectly packed. The fire pit had burned out, leaving only cold ashes behind. It was as if he had just stepped away for a moment, but he was gone. No footprints leading away, no signs of a struggle. Nothing. Then they found his phone, lying face down in the dirt. The screen was cracked, smeared with something dark. something they hoped was just mud. They turned it on. One last recording had been saved. The screen flickered. Static crawled across the audio, distorting his voice. He was breathing fast, panicked. The camera was pointed at the ground, shaking violently. I can hear it. It is right behind me, rustling. A low hum in the background, almost like chanting. Then a sharp gasp. The sound of him running. Twigs snapping beneath his feet. The video distorted. The screen flickered, and then a deep, guttural whisper slithered through the static. A voice that did not belong to him. A voice that did not belong to anything human. One word, drawn out, stretched, dripping with something inhuman. Run. Then silence. The video cut to black. That was all they found. No body, no blood, no struggle, just an untouched campsite. And a phone that told a story no one could explain. The legend. The locals had their own theories. That trail, that forest. It has a history. Every few years, a hiker disappears. No warnings, no remains, no explanations. Some say the land is cursed. Some say it is something older than the trees themselves. Something that does not hunt, does not chase, does not need to, because it waits. It waits in the spaces between the trees, in the stretches of darkness where the light does not reach. It waits for the foolish, the curious, the ones who walk too far alone. And when they do, they never come back.
Bloody Valentines, the Ultimate Horror Edition. Valentine's Day, a night of love, of candlelit dinners, of whispered promises. But for her, it was a night of horror, a night that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She had planned it. All. A perfect evening for her and her fiancé dinner, wine, soft music playing in the background. Everything was set. Everything was waiting. But he never showed up. At first, she thought he was running late. Maybe traffic, maybe a last-minute errand. But as the minutes turned to hours, unease settled deep in her chest. She called him. Straight to voicemail. She texted. No reply. The food on the table grew cold. The candles burned lower and lower until they were just flickering stubs of melted wax. And then her phone buzzed. A text. I'm outside. Relief flooded her. Finally, she rushed to the door, smiling, ready to scold him for making her wait so long. She swung it open. Her smile froze. The hallway was empty. The cold night air slipped in, wrapping around her like something unseen, something watching. Her eyes drifted down. A single red rose lay on the doorstep. Her heart stuttered in her chest. She stepped outside, looking left, right, no one. The street was dead silent, the porch light casting long, twisting shadows that seemed to move just out of sight. She called his name. Nothing. The only sound was the soft rustling of the wind and her own breathing. She picked up the rose. The petals were dark, almost black in the dim light, and wet, sticky. A cold dread crawled up her spine. She stepped back inside, locking the door, her hands trembling. She tried calling him again. Voicemail. Texted back. No reply. Something was wrong. Very wrong. And then the uneasy feeling in her gut twisted into something worse. Paranoia. That heavy sensation of being watched. She turned, scanning the room, the windows. The shadows seemed deeper than before. The house suddenly felt too big, too quiet. And then she noticed something. Her security camera. She grabbed her laptop, heart hammering as she opened the footage. She rewound to the time she got the text, and there it was. A figure, a tall, unmoving figure in a mask, standing right outside her door, not knocking, not moving. Just standing there. Watching. Her fingers went cold as she dragged at the timeline back. checking how long he had been there. Her breath caught in her throat. 2 hours. 2 hours of him standing there. In silence. And then she watched herself. In the footage, her excited, foolish self, opening the door, and in that split second, as she looked left and right down the hall, the masked figure took a step back, slipping into the shadows. She never saw him, but he was there. Right there. Watching. Waiting. She slammed her laptop shut. Her pulse thundering in her ears. She should call the police. She needed to call the police, but before she could move, her phone buzzed. Another text. "Did you like your rose?" Her blood ran cold. Her fingers shook as she typed back, "Who is this?" The reply came instantly, "See you soon." Her heart seized in her chest. No. She ran to the windows, checked every lock, every door. She turned on every light in the house, but it did not chase away the creeping terror coiling around her. She called the police, reported a stalker. They arrived in minutes, checked the area, searched the footage, but they found nothing. No footprints. No signs of forced entry. It was as if the figure had never been there. One officer suggested it was a prank, but another, the older one, the one who had seen things before, he looked at the rose. His face darkened, and he told her something that made her stomach twist. "If you get another one, don't open the door." The truth comes out a week past. She barely slept. Every shadow stretched too long. Every small sound sent her heart pounding. And then the news came. Her fiancé was found dead. His body was discovered inside his car, abandoned in an empty parking lot miles away. And the worst part? He had been dead since the night before, Valentine's, before she got the text, before the rose appeared at her door, before the figure stood outside, watching her for hours. Her stomach dropped. The air in the room suddenly felt too thick. Her hands turned ice cold. So, who sent the text? Who stood outside her door? And more importantly, what did they want? The unanswered tour, the funeral came and went. The house felt different after that. Empty, yet never truly alone. She stopped checking the security cameras, stopped checking the locks. Because deep down, she knew it did not matter, whatever had. Then there, it was still watching, and then, on the night of March 14th, exactly 1 month later, she woke up to a sound, a soft, delicate sound, like something sliding against the floor. Her breath caught in her throat as she turned on the bedside lamp, and then she saw it right there, right in front of her bedroom door, a single red rose, the petals dark, wet, sticky. Her phone buzzed, a text, and outside. And this time, she did not open the door.
The Nightshift Caller 3.207. The dead hour of the night, the time when the world feels stretched too thin, when the silence is too deep, too unnatural. That was the hour he hated the most. The gas station was always empty this late. Just flickering. Lights, humming refrigerators, and the occasional gust of wind rattling the glass doors. Nothing but silence and the weight of something unseen. And then, the phone rang, sharp, loud, splitting the quiet like a knife. He flinched, nearly dropping the inventory sheet in his hands. No one called this late. No one ever called this late. He picked up, pressing the cold plastic to his ear. Silence. Not complete silence, no. Something was there. Breathing, slow, ragged, too heavy, too close. He swallowed, forcing his voice to stay steady. Hello? No response. Just the breathing. And something else, something faint, distant, a sound that did not belong, a baby crying. He hung up, shaking it off. Just a prank. Had to be. He turned back to his work, but he could not shake it. That breathing, that cry, the way it dug into his ears like something crawling under his skin. And then, the phone rang again. He stared at it. His pulse pounded. Unknown. Number. He hesitated, but he answered. More breathing, more crying, a little louder this time. His throat went dry. He forced himself to speak. Who is this? No answer, just breathing. He hung up again. Now the silence felt different, like something was waiting. He checked the store cameras, empty aisles, empty parking lot. Nothing outside but the gas pumps dimly lit under the buzzing lights. He tried to shake the feeling off, but his hands were too cold, his skin prickled, his body knew something his mind refused to accept. And then the phone rang. Again. He picked it up, his breath shallow, his skin crawling. The same sounds, the breathing, the crying, but this time something changed. A voice. Low, dry, like wind scraping over bones. Turn around. His stomach dropped. His fingers clenched around the receiver. He did not want to turn. He did not want to see. Slowly, heart hammering, he reached for the security monitor instead. His breath caught. Pump number 6. A figure stood under the flickering light, still, motionless, facing the camera. No features. No movement, just standing there, watching. He felt sick. The station doors were locked. No one had come in. He would have heard, he would have seen. Then, the lights flickered, a quick flash, and when they came back, the figure was closer. Still, standing, still watching, but closer. His breath hitched. He reached for the landline, hands trembling as he punched in 911. The dispatcher answered. Calm, routine. What is your emergency? He tried to speak. His throat was too dry. There's someone outside, watching. They keep calling. A pause. Then, Sir, are you alone in the store? His stomach turned. His fingers clenched the counter. He glanced at the security. Feed. The figure was gone. His breath came short and fast. I don't know. The dispatcher's voice remained calm, but he could hear something beneath it. Something tense. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line. He nodded, even though she could not see him. He looked up. The front doors were glass. He could see the pumps, the empty lot. A shadow shifted, right outside. His stomach lurched, his eyes locked onto the glass. Nothing but the reflection of the store. And then, the security feed glitched. The screens warped, flickering, distorting. For a fraction of a second, he saw something wrong, the inside of the store, from a different angle, like someone else was holding the camera, like someone was watching from behind him. A choked sound left his throat. He spun around. Nothing. But the air. It was heavier, colder. The crying sound was still in his ears, but the phone had long since gone silent. The dispatcher was still talking, asking him questions, telling him to stay put. And then, the automatic doors slid open. The motion sensor had been triggered, but no one had come inside. Just cold air. It rushed in like a breath, like something unseen had finally stepped in. And then, the store lights cut out. Total darkness. And in the silence, a whisper, right behind his ear. Turn around. He screamed. The aftermath. The police arrived minutes later. They found him curled in the back of the store, shaking, clutching the phone like a lifeline. The security footage was reviewed, and that is when they saw it. The figure at pump 6. Standing for hours before the first call was even made, motionless, unmoving, just staring at the camera. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the very last frame. A split second of corrupted footage before the system cut out. A still image of a figure inside the store, standing right behind him. Mouth close to his ear, head tilted, whispering. He quit that night. Left town. Never answered. A phone call from an unknown number again, but sometimes, when he sleeps, his phone rings, and from the speaker, even though he never answers, he can still hear the crying.
Some mysteries are never solved, some nightmares never end, and some stories refuse to be forgotten. So, if you ever hear a whisper when no one is around, if you ever get a text from someone who should not be texting, or if you ever see a figure standing too still in the dark, trust your instincts. Lock your doors, check your cameras, and whatever you do not ignore the warning signs. Because sometimes the scariest thing is not the story itself. It is the fact that it could happen to you. If you made it this far, you are already one of you, so stay connected. Hit that like button, subscribe for more chilling tales, and share this video with someone who loves a good scare. And remember, February may be short, but the nightmares last forever.